Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and I'd like to introduce you to my esteemed co-host, a man who's had more malaria tablets than I've had hot dinners. And his name is the ecstatic gaucho, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, David. That's a great introduction.
We've been away for a little while, and the main reason being is that we've been out in the wilderness, haven't we? Out scouting the uncharted territories of cinema, and we've been trying to find some treasures that are off the beaten path. We had our guides, and we had our backpacks filled with pick,
projector,
water bottle, and compass.
Yep, I think all these things. Water purification tablets, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. Although they didn't have them back in Richard Burton's day, I reckon.
No. Mm. Do you know what he took instead?
No.
Brandy.
Yes. Oh, lovely. Well, I wish I'd thought of that before I set off on my journey. Brandy would have been very...
We'll return to that later on.
But anyway, listeners, yes, our theme tonight is explorers. Extraordinary. What are we going to go with, Jonathan? Are we going to go with extraordinary explorers or excellent explorers or...
Extraordinary, I think.
Extraordinary, okay. Extraordinary it is. So, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're talking about extraordinary explorers. We're talking about films about famous explorers.
Yes.
And we've picked out two great films, a much more recent film that Jonathan's picked out, which is very excellent. I'm looking forward to having a conversation about it.
Yeah.
In the second half of the show. It's called Embrace of the Serpent.
Yeah.
But first, we're going to talk about perhaps one of the greatest films you've never seen, because this is a film that is absolutely excellent, really, just an absolute, great film. And yet, for some reason, it just passed everybody by. It got a very, very limited distribution at the time it came out, despite being directed by a major director. And it just kind of came and went in a flash without anyone really seeing it. It never got really heavily promoted at the time. I think I was one of only a handful of people who've actually seen this film in the cinema during its original release. I saw it in Toronto when it came out, and it ran in 70 millimeter in a big cinema, but it ran for 1 week and then it closed. And and it's a film that, that's true. And
70 millimeters for 1 week.
It played for 1 week, and it got hardly, like, it didn't really get any real advertising or any sort of promotional stir at all. I only found out about it because I just read reviews and things, and I read a review of it. So then when I saw that it was opening in Toronto, I was like, oh, I'll go down with my partner at the time, and we went to see the film. And at the end of the film, the audience clapped. They applauded the film at the end.
Wow, they often get that,
which is something that's fairly rare outside of, the Cannes Film Festival. So, but then the film just kind of came and went. Nobody saw it. And then even on home video and subsequently, it just really has kind of languished in obscurity.
It's very strange because I'd never heard of it. I think you were the person that told me about it.
Yeah.
And so it's basically about Sir Richard Burton, rather than Richard
Yes.
Burton, the actor, or Richard Francis Burton, as he's sometimes called, to sort of distinguish him from the more famous actor.
Yes.
And but I read a biography of Richard Burton, or
Yes.
biography, him and his wife, and which is an absolutely terrific book. So I was sort of interested in him, but somehow I'd never heard of the film until you told me about it.
Yes, I remember that was many years ago, but I remember actually, and this is when we lived in a bit closer proximity, but I remember having you over to the house one
Mm,
night and we watched the film.
that's it.
Uh,
We did,
and
yeah.
um, and that had been the first time you'd seen it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've always tried to spread the word about this one, but it's one of
Yep.
those films again that's not been particularly easy to see
No.
over the years. But that's all set to change somewhat because in November in the United States, Kino Lorber is issuing the film on Blu-ray
Right.
finally. And there's also quite recently been an Australian Blu-ray release from Viavision, their imprint label,
Yeah.
which we can talk about a bit after we talk about the film. But anyway, sorry, I didn't say, but the film is actually called Mountains of the Moon.
Yes.
So it is directed by the late great Bob Rafelson,
Yep.
the man who directed Five Easy Pieces and The King of Marvin Gardens,
Yep.
and was responsible for bringing the Monkees pop group to the world. Before he started making films, he was a TV producer and created the Monkees. And that is probably what most people know him for, if not Five Easy Pieces, I suppose. Those are the two.
And the film Head.
Oh yes, Head, which was the Monkees film, yes, which
Yeah.
yeah, which is was his first feature, I think.
Mm. We made a
And
few with Jack Nicholson, didn't he?
he did, yeah. He was good mates with Jack Nicholson, and they kind of came up together. And Jack Nicholson is in a couple of his kind of his most famous films, Five Easy Pieces and The King of Marvin Gardens.
Yeah.
Um,
And the postman always rings twice as
oh
well.
yes, The Postman Always Rings Twice as well, which is really good. It's kind of a remake of an old film noir, sorry,
Yeah.
and that is a really good film as well with Jessica Lange.
Yeah.
Um, so this is a man, he wasn't particularly prolific in his filmmaking, but he made several really great films.
Yeah.
And Mountains of the Moon is one of them. But unfortunately, this one, for some reason, and it was a great passion project of his. Apparently, he wanted to make it for years, and he finally managed to get it off the ground. And but for some reason, and, it's baffling, but it just never got any traction and just kind of came and went without anybody seeing it.
Yeah, it's funny how some films, that happens. It's not like it's sort of particularly, you know, well, it's baffling basically. I can't think of any reason why they wouldn't wouldn't have been popular. I mean, it's an epic film, isn't it?
It is. It ticks all the boxes. It's an epic adventure film. It's about a famous historical figure. It
Yeah,
it's got action. It's got suspense. It's got drama. It's got romance. It's
yeah,
got big sweeping vistas and big,
yeah,
sort of swelling orchestral score.
yeah.
And it's intelligent and it's well considered.
Mm,
So it works as entertainment, but it's also got a little bit more substance to it. It's got really great performances, very early career performances from Patrick Bergin and
yeah.
Ian Glenn, who I guess has gone on to he's quite famous now for being in the Game of Thrones.
Okay.
But he's, was a well established character actor going on for years after
Yeah.
this film came out, and on television and things like that. So, and it's also got Richard E. Grant's in it.
Yes.
Fiona Shaw's in it.
Huh.
Who else? Lots of recognizable British character actors.
Yep.
Um, and it was filmed mainly in
Early film.
Kenya, so the film was a little bit had a bit of an arduous production because it was a relatively low budget. It was sort of maybe a
Right.
mid-budget kind of film,
Okay.
and they had shot it with a fairly small crew in
Right.
Kenya, and they had to endure some of the physical hardships that Richard Burton and Speak would have had to endure
Right.
because they had to trek across the wilderness to film this stuff. And
Yeah.
so so I guess I'll hand it over to you, Jonathan, to say about your tell us what you think about Mountains of the Moon.
Well, it's a terrific film, and yeah, I guess I first saw it with you 15 more years ago,
Hmm.
and I think I enjoyed it then. And I can't really remember much about it, but I did enjoy it. And when I watched it this time, I was thinking again, a bit like you. I was thinking, wait a second, why is this film? Because one of the things that I was thinking is epic. So there's a little bit like sort of Out of Africa. It really brings out the beauty of Africa.
Hmm.
And when he said it was filmed on 70 millimeter, I was thinking,
Well, no, sorry, just to
oh right,
clarify that, I think the film was shot in 35 millimeter,
oh
but
right,
I saw it in a blow up in 70
oh I see,
millimeter in the cinema at the engagement that I saw it in Toronto.
right, okay.
But I don't think it was shot in 70 millimeter.
Okay, okay. But still, it sort of could stand being sort of blown up into that sort of
Yeah.
spectacular sort of scale.
Mm.
And it's, I mean, I have this added interest of being interested in Richard Burton, who's an
Yeah,
extraordinary character.
he is indeed.
And he really is. And I mean, I think there should be a lot more films about Richard Burton because he's such a sort of eccentric and, well, it's just extraordinary character. And he's sort of, he rings sort of well, he's an interesting character for the present moment as well because he's sort of I don't know he says a lot about today, and
Yeah.
So yeah, it looks great. It's got all these. You keep on seeing these sort of British character actors. It's got Roshan Seth, I mean Indian character actor as well in
Mm.
there, and who I really like. I always like seeing him in films,
Mm.
and does it actually have Omar Sharif in it as well? Yeah, it does.
I was going to say that because Omar Sharif makes a little brief cameo appearance and it's uncredited. And so there is every time I watch the film, the same thing happens. And it did this morning. I revisited it this morning in preparation for our
Right.
conversation. And Omar Sharif, there's a scene where he's in it, but it's like sort of a longer shot and
Right.
he's kind of in the distance, standing on a kind of a balcony with Patrick Bergin, with Richard
Oh
Burton's character, having a conversation. And you sit there kind of going, is that Omar Sharif?
yeah.
That looks like it's Omar Sharif. And it sounds like it's Omar Sharif. Is that Omar Sharif? And you're sort of not quite sure. And
Right.
he doesn't get credited, I don't think, in the credits. It doesn't come up saying Omar Sharif's in it.
No, no, no.
So
So,
he's just kind of in it for a couple of minutes.
right.
And it does, if you look on the Wikipedia page, you can see that
Yeah.
it says Omar Sharif as a sultan unbilled.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so it's just interesting that he just kind of pops up in there just for a minute.
Hmm.
And there's all kinds of stuff like that. And also
Yeah.
it should be mentioned Delroy Lindo,
Yes.
who plays a sort of a fairly pivotal character in the story.
Yeah.
But he went on to have a great career. He's a really great actor. He's been
Yeah.
in lots of really good films. And so that's another familiar face that pops up in this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's got a Kenyan actor called Paul Onsongo
Yeah,
who is, I guess they said he's very big in sort of Kenya. So I guess
yeah,
there's wherever there's it's a very international cast.
yeah,
So there's sort of something for everybody. And well, we better to tell people what it's all about as well.
yeah. Okay, well, shall I do that? So
Sure.
Richard Francis Burton was basically, well, he was all sorts of things, but
He was.
he was basically a British army officer.
Yeah.
He came from, I think, from sort of, I guess what you'd call aristocracy. Sort of, he came from sort of the well-to-do. He had sort of
Yeah.
he came from a sort of a wealthy background in Britain,
Yeah.
and he became an army officer. And then he had a real gift for learning languages, and
Yes.
uh, and he kind of became an explorer. He became fascinated with sort of Eastern and Oriental cultures,
Yeah.
and he was one of the first, if not the first, Westerners to make the pilgrimage to Mecca in
Yeah.
disguise, because at the time, quite famously, he did this because he came back and wrote a book about it. But he, at the time, it was forbidden for foreigners to go to do the pilgrimage in Mecca. And if he'd been discovered, he basically would have been killed on the spot
Yeah.
as a for infiltrating this very religious ceremony.
Yeah.
Um, but he disguised himself and went on the pilgrimage, and then came back and wrote a book about it. And he is also famous for being the first person to translate the Kama Sutra and the Thousand and One Arabian Nights, and some other uh, um, Eastern literature, and bringing it to the West and translating it into English.
Yeah.
And he was also an explorer, just a man of action who basically went and fought in all kinds of famous battles. And he basically then went on a exploring to find the source of the Nile,
Yes.
which is basically, they wanted to find the main lake that fed the Nile River.
Yeah.
And again, and I guess this was all in aid, presumably, for colonial sort of pursuits, like commercial pursuits, that they wanted to map the interior of the African continent, find out, maybe find different trade routes and different sort of ways that they could move goods and things around, and go inland to, get the ivory and things like that. So he was sort of sponsored to go on this trip. And on when he went on the journey, he joined up with a chap called John Speake, who was he an army officer as well
He
originally?
was. Yeah.
And he was sort of kind of not quite as famous, but he was quite experienced kind of explorer himself. He'd gone to Tibet and gone and explored around Mount Everest and in India and things like that. So he was a sort of an experienced traveler. And
Yeah.
this, of course, is at a time when there wasn't airplanes and there wasn't sort of a lot of roads and things. So when you were talking about exploring Africa and these places, you're talking about doing a lot of walking along across really hostile terrains,
Yeah.
not necessarily welcomed by the indigenous population.
No.
Um, so this was a extremely you had to be a very brave and impetuous person to take on these kind of projects.
Yeah.
And you were basically putting life and limb at risk at all times to do this.
You are.
And Richard Burton also, he came back and he wrote. He was a very prolific author who wrote about his travels and about all kinds of books about different subjects and different his own experiences, his travels, his opinions on different cultures and all sorts of things. So he was really quite an extraordinary individual.
Yeah.
Like,
He
yeah,
was. And his, I so I first came across him when I bought this book called A Rage to Live, and it's a biography of him and his wife, and who is Isabel Burton, which is Isabel Arundel, which and so A Rage to Live sort of basically sums up his personality. He,
yes,
I think he's as you said, he was a polyglot, so he basically spoke lots of languages. I think they reckon on his Wikipedia page, they reckon he could speak 26 languages.
yeah,
Um,
26 languages and all kinds of the different dialects, and he
yeah,
became an expert in sort of Oriental cultures and in Muslim culture,
Yeah,
and also to the different sort of uh, African tribes and different dialects there. Like he was obviously like an extremely super intelligent
very, very bright.
person.
Also a man of action.
Yes,
Very
and a man. Well, because that's the thing, because he was sort of like it's usually you get one or the other, but this guy, he was also like he would deliberately go and try and get himself into
great.
involved in sort of military campaigns and conflicts. He
Yeah,
was known as like a quite a vicious and hearty warrior who could, hold his
yeah,
own against um, anyone. And apparently, he was a bit of an outsider in terms of the British military and the British establishment, because first of all, he was Irish by descent, and so and back then there was a little bit more prejudice about that kind of thing, and also he just was like he had a quick temper. He didn't kind of suffer fools gladly. He was very sort of could be a bit antagonistic and ridicule people, and he wasn't very good with authority. So he tended to be the type of person who kind of, sorry for the use of language, but he kind of pissed people off, and
he
people
did.
were either afraid of him or disliked him or sort of But they obviously also respected his abilities and his accomplishments and things.
Yeah, I mean, he was incredibly tough. That's one extraordinary thing. Even I think in his sort of late 50s or 60s, when he was living in Italy, I'm sure in this biography they say they went on him and his friends went on a sort of mountaineering trip into the Alps, and everybody else sort of went to sleep in either shepherds' huts or in tents, but he insisted on sleeping outside in the snow. Because it was just too sort of, sort of namby pamby to basically be sleeping in a tent,
Yeah.
warm. And,
Well, yeah, this is one hard dude. And I mean, even these people who were, did these explorers at this time, because it would have been such a physically demanding and dangerous, line of work to go trekking across the African continent, having to carry and be resourceful, and you don't know what you're gonna, aside from the wildlife, like I said before, you would be not necessarily greeted, with open arms by
no,
the native population who were living there,
no,
who would see them as intruders or as hostile. So you had to be made of very stern stuff indeed to be able to do this kind of work, and to be, they would go off, literally they'd go on these treks and they'd be walking for literally months, every
no,
day, miles and miles across very hostile terrain, and they could
no,
be gone for years. They would
yeah,
sort of have to get on a ship and go for 3 months to go somewhere, and then
yeah,
get off there and then trek, across a mountain to get to somewhere else where they'd catch another ship to go a little bit further, and then
yeah,
get let off and then have to walk,
yeah.
along these, things for hundreds and hundreds of miles. So, you had to be a quite a stern and hardy person.
Well, another thing that sort of illustrates this is the opening sequence of the film is he's on a previous expedition, earlier expedition, and basically it all goes wrong, all goes pear shaped, and he ends up with a sort of spear through his face.
Yes, yes. This is basically how the film opens. It opens with
Yeah,
a big swashbuckling, action-packed beginning, because it kind of takes you in right at the end of their first foray to Africa to find the source of the Nile, and it all goes horribly wrong because
yeah,
they basically run foul of an indigenous tribe of people there who end up attacking them in great numbers, and
yeah,
they were only a small party with just a handful of people, and they basically had to fight their way out, and they all got very either killed or very severely wounded, and that sort of bit of the story is where we come in. That's how it
yeah,
begins. So it's a
yeah,
very exciting and sort of kind of rousing opening to the film.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he did literally. In reality, he was stabbed in the face,
Yeah.
and
The
it's
spear
massive.
went through his cheek.
Yeah, I thought in reality it would gone through his sort of through his cheek down into the bottom of his jaw, or otherwise upwards.
Right.
Anyway, basically, he did have this massive scar on the side of his face. If you look at
Yeah.
photographs of him
Yeah.
from that, yeah, it's. But yeah, then they essentially they head off to the sort of interior, and they find what he calls Lake Victoria, what Burton calls Lake Victoria, and then I think he gets ill or something, doesn't he? And then Speak goes off on his own and finds another lake. And anyway, when they go home, that's when there's a disagreements for the
Mhm.
last sequence in the film. Which one is the source of the Nile? Is it Lake
Yeah.
Victoria, which Burton found, or the other lake, which I can't remember, which Speak found?
Yeah. And I guess the main sort of story arc of the film is the friendship that develops between the two. Because
Yeah,
obviously, if you have people who are in quite extreme situations and living in constant peril and stress over many months, they obviously form some sort of a bond.
yeah,
And this film sort of plays that up. That's kind of the main conceit of the film in terms of the story arc, is about how this friendship develops. But then when they go back to the quote unquote civilized world, they then end up getting played off each other by publishers and the Geographic Society and the kind of the politics of it. And so they end up sort of at odds with each other
yeah,
about the because they, at that point, they hadn't really figured out conclusively still where the source of the Nile was.
yeah,
So that ends up being the sort of the last act of the film, plays that conflict out that develops between them.
yeah. And yeah, because there's a sort of the basic thing is that Burton's this headstrong and impetuous guy, unconventional guy, and Speak is much more conventional, mild mannered, and sort of uh, I guess just more sort of rule abiding than
Yes.
Burton.
And it's quite interesting that I was reading about, because just like you, like me, I wasn't familiar with Richard Burton at all until I saw this film, and then I became totally fascinated by this man.
Yeah.
Um, and I've spent, over the years I've read biographies, and actually I would heartily recommend a website
Yeah.
that's online that's called Burtonania
Burtonania.
org, and I'll put the link in the show notes because this is all free, by the way.
Right.
And this website has collected. It's a bit basically like a repository of all the life and times and works of Richard Francis Burton. And
Right.
you can go on there, and they've actually got PDF facsimiles of all of his books. He was a very prolific author, and he wrote something like 60 books,
Yeah.
including the books that detail his travels with Speak in Africa. And there's all kinds of fascinating things on here. Plus, he wrote a lot of just, they used to print little pamphlets where
Yeah.
someone would just kind of go, this is kind of before there was a lot of magazines and stuff. So he would literally just decide, oh, I want to write an article about something. And he'd sit there and he'd write it, and then they'd publish it as a little pamphlet.
Yeah.
So he used to do these, he used to churn these out all the time. And he used to write for all sorts of periodicals and all sorts of stuff. So he was very, very prolific author
Yeah.
on a myriad of subjects, and it's all been collected on this website. So
Yeah.
as I said, I'll put a link in the show notes, because if you want to learn more about him and his life and his work and things, you can go to this website, and it's all free. It's all there just as a free resource on the internet that you can read all his books. You can look at all sorts of pictures and um,
Yeah.
things about where he went and his travels and his adventures and his, because even after all of his exploring days were over, he then went on to be an ambassador in several countries as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
He spent time in Brazil, I think, and
Yeah.
then he spent time as the a British ambassador in Syria, I think, in Damascus,
Oh, okay.
where he ran into all kinds of trouble because he was upsetting people. And he ended up getting sacked, basically. They pulled him back. They called him back and said, you got to leave because, at one point, apparently they tried to kill him.
Ah,
Somebody tried to kill him because he was upsetting people.
yeah,
Um, what's interesting about the film too is that because the film paints a picture of Richard Burton as a very kind of progressive person,
yeah,
um, which it's a little bit disingenuous because I think although he obviously was progressive intellectually and in his pursuit of knowledge of other cultures and
yeah,
learning other languages and finding out about the world, there's also in some of his writings and stuff you can tell, and by all accounts, he was a little bit still of a
yeah,
proper British colonialist who
yeah,
had certain sort of attitudes that probably most people would find slightly problematic nowadays.
yeah, yeah.
And
He was a man
obviously
of
his
his time.
person, sorry,
He was a man of his time, wasn't he?
he was a man of his time, and he was very much a sort of a British army guy, and he had certain
Yeah,
sort of attitudes, fundamentally about the basic superiority of the white European
yeah,
and and things like that, which I think today obviously we find more problematic. And
mm,
obviously his personality, he was a little bit more, as I said, he was known for being a little bit more caustic and aggressive and stuff with people, and not necessarily like a, really sort of amiable, affable kind of chap.
yeah,
so, but the film kind of paints him as a more progressive and, which maybe isn't necessarily. It's more of an idealized version of
yeah. Well,
Richard
he's a man of
Burton.
many contradictions.
Yes,
I've got a few recommendations if you're interested in Richard
sure,
Burton.
absolutely.
One is the biography. It's A Rage to Live. It came out in '98, and it's by Mary Lovell. And then there was an earlier one that came out, I think, in the sort of '60s. But I think that's much more up to date. This other one came in the 1967 called The Devil Drives, which I have here. It's a bit of a sort of '60s take on him, and it's written by this woman Fawn M. Brody, and she was from Utah. And so, Burton, who basically got everywhere pretty much in the world,
Pretty
he
much,
also
yeah.
ended up in Utah, and I think met old Joseph Smith, maybe on his travels. But anyway, but then the one I'd really recommend as well is this one called The Collector of Worlds, which is a German by a chap called Ilya Troyanov. He's a German author, and so it's a novel actually told through the eyes of Burton's bearers or assistants, helpers. And there's one is I think when he's in India, one when he's on his trip to Mecca, and one is in Africa itself.
Hmm.
And so they sort of look at his sort of quirky personality and abrasive personality
Hmm.
from the point, but it's all told from the point of view of sort of people who aren't, European, essentially, which is a sort of good corrective. And
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
it's really entertaining, highly entertaining book. I'd really recommend it.
Oh, okay. Well, if you send me a link, I'll stick that in the show notes as well because I haven't read that one, so I'd be quite interested. And I've
Yeah,
got a few biographies, but I'd have to go into the other room to go get them, so I'm not going to
yeah,
say what they are. But there's lots of really good books about him, and like I said, if you go to that website, you can also read his own writings and his own. And I believe his wife wrote a biography of him as well.
yes.
But obviously, they might be slightly more, um, you know.
Well, she didn't like a lot of his interests because she was like more like Speak. She was very conventional, sort of. She was very devout Roman Catholic,
Yeah.
and so basically she burnt all his papers when he died,
Yes.
which
Yes.
is a bit of a
Well, some things that she was thought would either be that
yeah,
she either personally found slightly problematic or things that she thought might, tarnish his reputation or
yeah,
and again, he held some quite controversial views about some things, and
Did.
um, was not sort of, how would you say it? What's the phrase? He wasn't backwards about coming forwards or whatever about his opinions and his attitudes about things. So she did sort of try and suppress certain things that he did posthumously,
Yeah.
so that his reputation would be preserved.
Yeah.
Um,
So my
um,
question for you is, what do you think of the last bit where it's sort of, because I mean, I guess the main bit of the film is where they're on their adventure in Africa, which is
hmm.
just, great bit of sort of epic filmmaking.
Yeah,
And
a
what
lot of harrowing adventure kind of stuff, and they run into some, they at one point kind of, enter into a kingdom, and then they're not welcomed very nicely. They kind of get taken prisoner by
yeah,
this tribe, who then sort of, they have some dramatic moments there.
yeah.
Um, but so sorry, what was your question about what?
Well, what do you, so I mean, I think that bit sort of just
Yeah,
it's hard, sort of. I guess it's just an adventure film. It's sort of easy to enjoy in a way.
yeah,
It's sort of
yeah,
and it's spectacularly beautiful as well.
yeah.
And but then the last bit, what did you make of that when they come back to London and they're sort of it gets their sort of squabbles, they fall out.
Well, it's quite interesting because my understanding, again, like I think this film, it's based on a book that was called Burton and Speak, which was like sort of an historical fiction that was
Yeah,
written based on the true story of their adventures.
yeah,
But yeah, I think it does take a few liberties because in reality, the way the film portrays Speak as well is a little bit of disingenuous in terms of what he was like in real life. Because if anything, their personalities were probably opposite of what they were in the film in real life, and that he was a lot more progressive, and his attitude towards the native cultures and the people,
okay.
apparently he was much nicer to people than Burton was,
Right.
and apparently he even ended up getting married to a native lady on one of his travels
All right.
after he wasn't, he went back
Yeah,
without Burton. He went
yeah,
back to Africa a couple times
yeah,
subsequently. Um, so the film portrays them, like I said, in more of a sort of a dramatically idealized way in terms of to make the dramatic impact.
yeah,
But the film, I guess, really is ultimately about that relationship and this friendship that
yeah,
develops in adversity. But then when they go back to so-called civilization, they then get torn apart, or they're where when the politics and the
yeah,
sort of the need for success and glory and
yeah,
all these things kind of come into play, it sort of rips that, it kind of destroys that friendship. And that's kind of, I mean, when we were talking about maybe why the film wasn't, a big huge success at the time and didn't really get it, obviously the distributors didn't have a huge amount of faith in it because they didn't really push it and make a big
yeah,
fuss about it, about, because you would have thought this would have been released during
mm,
Oscar season. There would have been a
yeah,
big buzz about it. Everyone would have got nominated for Oscars, and it would have been one of the big films. But instead, it just sort of disappeared without a trace.
yeah,
And one of the reasons for that might be because the way the film's structured, it basically, the first two acts of the film are rip roaring boys own adventure kind of stuff, like,
yeah,
guys out in the wilderness, hostile
yeah,
environment, sort of survivalist kind of adventure, action adventure film. But
yeah,
then the last sort of half an hour of the film is back in England, and it's more of this kind of drama about the politics and the disintegration of this strong friendship.
yeah,
And actually, and the film even, it should be noted, makes some allusions to even it kind of implies that there might have been a like kind of like a, what would you say, like a bromance, or like a,
Yeah.
that, like there might have even been a little bit more, uh,
Good.
more of a deep feelings towards the men that than might have been acceptable in polite British society at the time.
Right. Yeah.
So, so the film kind of plays with the relationship between the two men,
Yeah.
and how it breaks down at the end. So, and because of that, the film, the arc of the film, it kind of starts off, with the high adventure, then kind of carries on that way, but then the last bit of the film is more subdued and more of a drama. So it has a different kind of pace
Yeah.
than you would expect from sort of an action adventure film.
Yeah.
So perhaps that might explain one of the reasons why the film maybe didn't
Yeah.
find its audience
Yeah.
because of that. Because,
But
sorry.
it is fairly true to the story of what happened, I think, isn't it? That they didn't,
Hmm.
that they sort of fell out over this thing and.
Yeah.
Um,
Although when you read, depending on what you read about them, it sounds like there was really no love lost between them right from the get go, and that
right.
they weren't necessarily, so the conceit of the film, that they developed this really close friendship and bond, which again makes sense because, like I say, if you get placed in those kind of circumstances for a prolonged period of time with someone, you are going to develop a reliance on them, and sort of a, that there would be some sort of a bond of going through that together.
Yeah.
But
It is.
apparently, from a lot of the stuff I've read in real life, they kind of hated each other's guts pretty
Okay.
much right from the get go, or maybe that's a bit strong, but they maybe had more of a competitive relationship
Right.
right from the get go.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Well, another thing I was going to say is that one of the reasons he did get very ill, I think, on these trips.
hmm,
But what he did to because as we said earlier on, they didn't have water purification tablets. His approach was to drink alcohol, and I think he basically drank bottles of brandy and sherry and port,
yeah.
basically all the way there and all the way back.
Well,
And
which must have been, well, they would have had to carry all this stuff.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you would have been really dehydrated as well. It wouldn't have been good for you, would it? Because you'd be out in the hot,
How
sort
he
of.
how he managed that, I cannot
Yeah.
understand.
Well,
Yeah,
one other thing I want to make note of, because I think it's a really interesting character, is the character of Bombay, CD
yeah,
Bombay, who is quite a pivotal character. And apparently, in real life, this was an extraordinary individual who actually he was originally a slave
yeah,
in India, and then he escaped at some point, or he got away because his master passed away. His master.
yeah.
I don't like using that term, but
No,
he's an extraordinary character because he ended up being one of the party with John Speake. He hooked up with him and became a guide, and he actually apparently um, crossed the entire continent of Africa on these expeditions, not just with Richard Burton and John Speake, but with Livingston,
yeah,
with other famous explorers as well. And
yes,
this guy sort of was all this talk. It's kind of absurd when you think about this idea of they're going out to discover the source of the Nile,
mm,
because basically what we're talking about is Europeans coming over and looking at something that they've never seen before, but it's
yeah,
obviously always been there, uh, you know, for thousands of years before they showed up. And this was a man who was from Africa, who went on all of these major expeditions,
yeah,
and he obviously was a very intelligent man who knew all these different languages as well, and went on all these adventures, and was quite pivotal in
yeah,
mapping the continent and acquiring all this knowledge and everything. Yet we all know about Richard Burton, and we all know about John Anning Speake, and we know about
yeah,
Livingston, but we never hear about this guy,
yeah,
and that just goes to show you right there. And
yeah,
in the film, he's quite a pivotal character, because he's the one that that sort of helps them navigate some of the hostilities and things throughout,
Yeah.
and is instrumental in organizing the trips and making sure they have supplies. And he's really quite a
Yeah.
fascinating character.
Yeah. He
I would
was.
almost think I wish somebody would make a film about him, because
Yeah.
he's a really, really interesting historical figure that you don't really hear much about him.
Yes. Well, I was listening to a talk by Ilya Troyanov this afternoon about his book, and so the third section is narrated by Sidi Bombay,
Oh, right.
and he said he was talking about this as well. How he'd been basically, I guess he was the first recorded person to have gone from one side of Africa to the other, probably, or one, along with, I don't know. Yeah, I think it would have been him.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, what an extraordinary uh, character he was. And yeah, there is actually a page on the RGS, the Royal Geographical Society, about him, or a document about him. As now, I think now
He's more recognized now because obviously over the years we become more we're starting to redress some of the
yeah,
sort of things in the past where people have been slighted or passed over for recognition, and that's great. And
yeah,
the character in the film is really pivotal, and the actor, his name is Paul Onsongo,
yeah,
who you were mentioning, is quite an established actor in his home country,
yeah.
but really, really interesting bits of history throughout this.
Mm,
And I love that scene with because I remember at the time there's a scene in the film when um, Burton is trying to convince the Royal
yes,
Geographic Society to send him on another expedition,
yeah,
and in it, so he goes to meet David Livingston,
yeah.
and they have this great scene where they meet, and because they're both these really tough, hard explorers, they start comparing wounds and scars. Kind of go, oh, I got this one when a lion jumped me in this place, and oh, this is from my spear wound, and oh,
Yeah.
this is here is when my leg
That's a
swelled.
fun scene actually. It's a bit
Yeah,
like
yeah,
Jaws.
it's a terrific scene. It's very funny, and it's just these two hardy men kind of going, "Yeah, look, I got this scar when I got shot,
Yeah,
and such, and I got this scar when the jaguar ripped my side open or whatever." And it's
yeah,
kind of this kind of thing. And then I remember because like I said, I was probably one of the few people who saw this film in the cinema at the time. And then about a year later or so, or whenever it was, Lethal Weapon 3 came out.
oh
And
yeah,
they had that scene with Rene Russo and Mel Gibson comparing,
oh
you
do
know,
they?
gunshot wounds or whatever.
Right,
And
yeah,
I was looking at that at the time. I remember watching at the time and going, oh, they cribbed this from Mountains of the Moon,
right,
didn't they? Because
yeah,
presumably Richard Donner probably did see Mountains of the Moon.
yeah,
And they obviously cribbed that scene. And I remember
yeah.
thinking that going, they copied that out of Mountains of the Moon.
Well, they do have a similar scene in Jaws as well, don't they? Where
Oh
they
yeah, yeah, that's true too. There is one, yeah, where they kind of go, oh yeah, I got this from the yeah, that's true. Yeah, and that predates both of the films.
yeah. It's a
But
good.
anyway,
When I make
it's a
my
terrific
films,
scene. It's very funny and very you
yeah,
know.
it's definitely worth it. And last thing I'm going to say is that one of the strange things is that Patrick Bergin, who's the Richard Burton,
Mm,
he's really terrific actor, real leading man,
mm,
and but his career didn't really sort
yeah.
of soar like you would have expected, sort of with this
Yeah,
film.
there was a point because after this he did that Sleeping with the Enemy, which was a big hit, and he kind of played a baddie in it, didn't he? He played like a wife beater or whatever. I don't really remember the film very well.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, and he did a film of Robin Hood, didn't he, where he played Robin Hood.
yeah,
And again, that is another film which is absolutely terrific, really entertaining, really smart,
is it?
funny kind of take on the Robin Hood legend.
Okay.
And it came out, unfortunately, it came out at the same time as the Kevin Costner Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Oh,
And
right.
obviously, in the Battle of the Robin Hoods, the Patrick Bergin Robin Hood sort of lost out
Right.
in that scenario, and ended up much like Mountains of the Moon. It kind of came and went without any fanfare, any,
Okay.
I think Uma Thurman's in it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, she is. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's a terrific film. I think if people who like Robin Hood films, you should definitely go and try and
Okay.
search that one out. But again, that's another film that's become a bit of an obscurity. So, yeah, was there anything else you want to talk about Mountains of the Moon?
No, I think that's. Oh yeah. Well, I guess the one. It's got good dialogue as well,
Yeah,
which I wanted to say. And yeah, there's one. I'll give you one example. When they're back in the UK, he says, "Have you shot a lion? No, partridge."
yes, yes. There's lots of little terrific bits like that. Yeah. And I mean, obviously, just for time wise, we're going to probably have to kind of move on to the
Yeah.
next film. But we
Okay.
haven't even really talked about Bob Rafelson that much. But obviously, quite a seminal, sort of important figure in 1970s Hollywood.
Yeah.
In the kind of the new Hollywood kind of era.
Yes.
But I don't think we're gonna. And I mean, there's lots of stuff about him already, so I probably we don't need to go into a huge amount of detail about talking about him, do we? Because he's obviously quite a famous film director and
Yes.
made a lot of really great films.
Yeah.
And this is one of them. So, folks, please go and check it out. I don't know about the streaming situation at all. The rights, I guess, are held by Studio Canal now, the film.
Okay.
I've already held this up, but I'll hold it up again. This is the Australian Blu-ray from Viavision, their imprint label. So this came out quite recently and is definitely worth picking up because it's got a lot of really good supplements on it. And also for our listeners in the United States, which sort of account for a good 50% of our listeners are in North America. So I will say that Mountains of the Moon is going to be released on Blu-ray by Kino Lorber on the 26th of November, 2024. So depending on when you're listening to this, if you're listening to this after the 26th of November, it's out already. So go to your favorite place where you buy your films and get yourself a copy of this because it's great. And hopefully it'll pop up on some streaming services and things as well as it proliferates on home video. Presumably
Yeah, it
it'll
should do.
start showing up on streaming platforms as well.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous, the situation at the moment, because it is a great film.
Yeah, it really is. This is like I said at the beginning, this is kind of the greatest film that you've never seen.
Yeah, it's not a niche film at all.
No, it's got big stars in it, very familiar faces. It is like a rousing, rip-roaring action adventure,
Yeah.
Historical drama, and it's absolutely terrific. Well worth searching out.
Definitely.
So, folks, get out there after the podcast and go and find this film and give it a watch because it's terrific.
Yeah.
We are going to take a very brief intermission to go and towel ourselves off and rehydrate after our walk in the wilderness, and and then we will be back to talk about our second explorer adventure film called Embrace of the Serpent, which was Jonathan's pick for our show tonight. So we'll be back in. For you listeners, it will be literally mere seconds. But listen very carefully to the messages that you're going to hear because I think you're going to want to know about this. So, listen.
Walking space, heading out for a walk in Lock in Space, the debut single by Neil Rel. Available to stream or download wherever you get your favourite music.
And we're back. Jonathan, welcome back from your travels.
Mhm.
And it's good to see you back in the old film swap saddle, back at home base, talking about great films.
Yeah.
And tonight we are talking about what did we agree on in the end? Extraordinary
Explorers. Yeah.
Extraordinary Explorers is is the title we're going to go with, folks.
Yep.
So you'll know that already because you'll have seen it on our Gumph,
Yep.
on our promotional Gumph, and on the title of the podcast episode. But as of recording, we hadn't quite made that decision yet. But anyway, the second of our Explorers double bill tonight is a really exceptional film. I enjoyed it immensely, and
Good.
this was Jonathan's pick. I actually had not seen. I'd kind of vaguely heard about it, but I hadn't had a chance to see it. So I'm really glad Jonathan suggested this one, and I'm going to hand it over to him to introduce you to Embrace of the Serpent.
Right. Well, the Embrace of the Serpent is a 2015 film from Colombia, which was entered into the Cannes Film Festival. Oh no, the Academy Awards, I think, for the Colombian entry, and
It was at Cannes as well,
and
2015 Cannes Film Festival.
and two, yeah, both.
Yeah.
And it won an award at Cannes, the Art Cinema Award. And basically, it tells the story. This film, like the other film, tells the story of two explorers, and this time they're in the jungles, the Amazon jungle. But these two explorers, they're not separated by sort of personality in the same way that Hanning and Speke and Burton were. These two are separated by time. So there's one explorer is a chap called Theo von Martus or Martius, something like this. And then he's around sort of 1900s, 1910, 1909, something like that. And then there's a later chap in the 40s who is looking for him, his name is Evan, I think.
Should we point out that this film, though, is a fictionalized?
Yes, I'm going to get there.
Story.
I'm going to get there.
Oh, sorry, Jonathan. I'll leave you to
it. Don't worry. So basically, there's these two guys, Theo van Martus, and then there's Evan comes looking for him, and following in his footsteps, because basically Theo disappears in his earlier explorations, and the other one comes looking for him. But basically, this is a fictionalized story of a German explorer, like the fictional one is to the Germans, called Theodor Koch Grunberg rather than von Martius, and the American is called Richard Evans Schultz.
Yes.
And
so the film isn't like a biographical film about these two historical figures, but rather it's a fictionalized story inspired or based upon these historical figures.
Exactly. And I guess because the director sort of thought these are two interesting guys, I wonder if we could sort of imagine them sort of encountering each other, although presumably, but they didn't actually, even in this film, but they don't exactly encounter each other. But in this film, they sort of encounter one encounters the idea of the other one, the remains of him, because they both bump into this, a bit like Sidi Bombay, they both have a sort of local guide.
Yes.
In this case, a local shaman called Karamakate, I think his name is. And so there's
Karamakate. Yeah, I'll have to defer to you on how to pronounce that for sure. But that.
I'm not quite sure that's right. But anyway, so they both have him as their guide through the jungle. And they're both on a sort of a journey. So the first one, he's going to Theo, the German, and I think he's an anthropologist. he's looking for. He's basically got malaria. He didn't have any malaria tablets, and he's looking with the shaman. He's hoping the shaman will take him to his tribe, and they'll get a cure for his illness, essentially.
Mm.
Whereas the Evan Schultz is looking for Yakruna, which I think is the ayahuasca sort of drug, basically, but is also looking to find out more about the earlier explorer. So Evan Schultz is a botanist rather than an anthropologist. They're both sort of scientists, and they both end up looking for these medicines, these local potent plant medicines, essentially. And it's a terrific movie because they sort of follow the second one, the more modern story, sort of follows in the footsteps. So they encounter some of the same spots and the same people that the first guy met, and it's all in black and white, I should say, as well.
Yes, beautiful black and white. It's
Beautiful.
a very stunning, visually stunning film. It's quite striking.
Yeah, it is. And
like you say, they both they go on this journey, separated with the same guide, but separated by about 30 or 40 year
40 years
interval in between. And
yeah.
so you see, the previous the older story juxtaposed with the newer.
Yeah.
With the newer, well, but it's still sort of set in what, like you said,
40s,
the 20s or the 30s or something.
Yeah, I think the first one's 1909, the second one's 1940 or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so, and they're both, I guess, a lot of it's about their interaction with sort of indigenous culture and in looking for indigenous knowledge and how far they can learn from people and the dangers of sort of imposing their own worldview on local people. And it's very subtle and sensitive film, the way it handles those issues. And it's really terrific movie, basically, I would say.
Yeah.
What did
we
you
see it all through the relationship, because again, similar to Mountains in the Moon, sorry, this film focuses a bit on the development, at least in the first story, in the development of a friendship between these two characters.
Yeah,
this Karamakate, who is like a shaman, but he's very like he lives on his own, doesn't he? He just apparently he believes his people have been wiped out by the rubber barons and the rubber the Europeans who came to harvest rubber. And they were quite nasty to the indigenous population, very routinely enslaved them and drove them off their land and were quite horrible to them. And so he's believes all his people are gone, and he's living sort of as like a hermit, like sort of off on his own in the jungle. And then this explorer comes to him because he'd heard that he had some knowledge of some medicine that might be able to help cure him.
Yeah.
And so then they go on this quest to find this flower, which is, what is it called? It's
Yakruna, I think.
Yakruna.
Yeah. Yakruna.
So is that a real thing?
It's apparently a fictional sacred plant, according to Wikipedia.
Oh, okay.
But the way I sort of thought it was a ayahuasca, which is this sort of psychedelic sort of brew, basically. But I guess because it's fictional, it's got a bit more sort of leeway what it is. You can think of it whatever you prefer, essentially.
Well, and I guess the idea is that it kind of represents all the sort of the knowledge and the natural environment and things, about the power and the insight and the possibilities that are there within the natural world down in that environment, and it's all kind of represented in this flower
yeah,
that they're seeking, that's
yeah,
supposed to give either this great insight or cure your body, or it can
yeah,
they're not really clear about exactly what it's supposed to do. And they're also not clear the two storylines, the chap, the American who comes along sort of 30-40 years later, he's apparently read the writings of the first explorer,
yes,
and he's come down to find this plan, and he comes and he finds this chap and says, hey, can you take me to this place
yeah,
to get some of this plants? But it's unclear about really what his motives, what his agenda is, isn't it? It's a little bit left ambiguous.
mm, yeah,
And as the story progresses, you kind of learn more about what the agenda of both characters. But we also see what I like about the film is how it shows to the gradual effects of European settlers, and the trade in
yeah,
the foreigners who came to take away the rubber or whatever else,
yeah,
and how you've seen how that impacts them, the local people, gradually over that course of those decades.
yeah,
And there's quite a pivotal scene with the mission, isn't it? It used to be a rubber plantation,
yeah,
and then it's been taken over by this missionary who, I mean, it's quite dodgy right from the start, because it's this kind of like sort of middle-aged man who's all by himself
yeah,
in this big, huge plantation, and
yeah,
he's just kind of collecting stray children.
yeah,
And they're all, so nowadays that would be looked at highly suspiciously.
yeah, yeah,
But he basically has all these children living in this mission, and he's teaching them, the Bible teachings and things. But then when they come and stop by at this place, they
this is the
find
other
out that
point.
underneath there's
Yeah,
some that this man is not all what he seems.
no,
And but then what happens is that there's a whole sort of sequence of events that happen there, and then it cuts to the more, the current story, and then it shows the effects of that in those incidents,
yeah,
and how that then evolved over the decades
yeah,
since then to what's going on at that mission now,
yeah,
which is quite an interesting story.
yes, because essentially the chap in 1940 goes back to ends up at the same sort of missionary station.
Yeah.
But rather than it's all much more dilapidated and broken down, and it's rather than being run by a sort of, well, frankly, unpleasant sort of monk, it's run by a really, really unpleasant guy who thinks he is Jesus. So it's got
Yes, he's like some
worse.
sort of like convinced himself he's some sort of messiah figure.
Yeah,
And I guess all that to said, because, well, I guess a slight spoiler alert here, but what happens is that there's a chain of events that happen at the mission in the first story, and then 30 years later when they go back, all of these kids are now grown up, but they've obviously spent years in this place where someone else has moved in to take over, and he is, like you say, this kind of fanatical kind of messiah, figure who's kind of created this kind of commune.
yeah,
And they've all slightly gone bonkers.
yeah,
So and they kind of find themselves back in this at this place. Well, obviously the shaman does.
yeah.
So
It reminded me of a few films. Well, it reminded me a little bit of the first, the sort of 1909 Monk on his own. Well, I guess both of them. They reminded me a bit of sort of Apocalypse Now, with
yeah, kind of Hearts of Darknessy kind of
yeah,
vibe going there, definitely.
this guy stuck in the jungle in the middle of his sort of just completely out of his mind, essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
And but also there's a bit in Apocalypse Now, in Redux, the sort of longer version, where he stops off, where the boat stops off at this sort of French plantation in the middle of off the Mekong, and they go for dinner. They're sort of eating sort of around a long dining table with candles and sort of fine wines and all this sort of
Mm.
stuff. And it's this sort of incongruity that you get in those sort of scenes in the in that scene in Apocalypse Now Redux that you find in this one as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, the first film with the rubber barons bit, that's set around the same time as Fitzcarraldo, which we've also talked about, because
Yeah.
that's all about rubber barons in the Amazon rubber boom as well.
It is indeed. And I thought that quite harrowing scene in the first bit when they find that chap, because one of um, the scientist in the first story, I call it the first story, meaning the sort of the 1909
Yeah,
bit, and it kind of cuts between them. But in the first story, he has a companion who is a native Colombian, but he's sort of, obviously well educated, and he's traveled with him, and he's helped him to compile his notes, and he helps him to get around, and
yeah,
he's sort of his companion and his friend. And
yeah,
at one point, but he's a former slave who used to work in the rubber,
yeah,
trade. And when I say work, he was basically a slave, and he was obviously maltreated, but he got out of that situation, and now he travels around with this scientist.
yeah.
And at a certain point, they come across a little small encampment where there's this guy collecting rubber from a sort of a
Mm,
small little batch of trees, and
yeah,
he kind of loses it because it kind of brings back memories of his bad experiences. So he kind of goes on a little bit of a rage and
yeah,
sort of kicks all the little pots of rubber out and spills it all and kind of trashes the place. But
yeah.
then it turns out that there's a chap who's been left there to look after this little plot and
Mm.
gather the rubber, and he's been obviously very badly treated, and he's
Got
an
one arm.
amputee, and he's got scars all over his face, and one of his eyes is out, and he's got sort of scars all over his back. So he's obviously someone who's been treated incredibly
Yeah,
badly by these sort of rubber sort of guys.
yeah.
And um and I really like that scene because aside from it being really disturbing and harrowing, it kind of underpins that idea about how, because a lot of European countries are all their economies and everything are all built from taking the wealth and resources from these other countries in South America, or be it in Africa or whatever. So that seems really good at sort of underpinning that, about the fact that our culture, where we live quite affluently and have nice comfortable lives and everything, that is kind of the bedrock, isn't it? The foundation of it is that kind of that suffering and that sort of abuse and stuff that all kind of happens over there behind the scenes, which kind of underpins our whole sort of culture and our lifestyle.
Mm.
So I think it was quite a powerful moment, quite powerful, kind of disturbing sort of
It's a very powerful
yeah,
scene. Very
yeah,
powerful.
yeah. And you really sort of get that sense of kind of, that is where all this wealth comes from.
Yeah,
It's the suffering that sort of underpins it all. So
yeah.
I thought that this film does really well at sort of showing that, and how the impact of, as people have moved around in the world and Europeans have gone to other places to explore or take away the wealth and stuff, about how it's very gradually, subtly changed the cultures and for the indigenous people who lived there in the first place. So um, the film deals with that quite powerfully, but like you say, kind of subtly as well. Like it's not like I've beaten you over the head.
Yeah, well,
Kind of
because
thing.
basically, the thing I was thinking that made me say that subtle way, because I guess that scene's not so subtle, but there are other bits that. So there's this both of the sort of explorers are sort of, I guess, they're decent people essentially,
Yeah.
and the relationship they have with the shaman is sort of interesting because he shows them a lot, but also they sort of show him
Mm.
things as well. So there's one bit where in the chap in 1909, the anthropologist loses his compass, which he's getting very upset about,
Yeah.
and so um, they essentially know it's been stolen by some local people, and but he's
Yeah, stealing might be too strong a word as well, because I think that might have been interpreted that it was given to them as a gift.
Well, maybe. Anyway, they've
Yeah.
taken it somehow.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is he's very keen to get it back. But he's not just keen to get it back because it's his or because he needs it for
No.
navigation. He's very keen to get it back because he says as soon as they start using this, then they're going to forget about their sort of indigenous ways of navigation.
Mm.
And, basically
Yeah.
it's like the sort of beginning of their sort of westernization, essentially. So that's why I
Yeah.
need it back, because otherwise they'll be ruined
Yeah.
in
And
pristine
it
state.
was an interesting dynamic there, because on the one hand you kind of think, okay, yeah, he's got a point, and it's kind of well meaning. He
Yeah,
doesn't just want it back because it's his stuff and he wants it back.
yeah,
He wants it back because he has the motive of trying to preserve something.
yeah,
But at the same time, the attitude is a little bit kind of patronizing as well, isn't it? Because he's kind of saying, oh, well, I don't think they should have it, because I don't think they should learn about this because it'll change them.
yeah.
So
Well,
there
it's
is like
also
a little bit of a patronizing kind of attitude as
yeah.
well.
Well, the way I looked at it was less patronizing, more that something so small can lead to massive changes,
Yeah,
and
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
and and also because he is somebody who is a sort of admirer of their culture, and
Yeah,
essentially he knows that this little compass, which is something, it's not even a gun, or it's not something that's sort of, it's just a compass.
yeah.
Uh,
They could have a huge
it would just, in a sense,
impact.
it's the beginning of the destruction of their culture,
Yeah.
and that's what. So I don't think that's patronising
Well,
entirely.
but it was an interesting response that Kara Makate had, in that he kind of said,
Yeah,
"Well, who are you to tell them that they can't learn?"
well, that's true. That
Yeah,
is,
and you
yeah,
kind of think, "Well, yeah, he's got a point as well," because that's what's interesting, is because you can see
both sides.
you can
That's why I
see
liked
the
it. That's why I
different.
thought it was subtle. The
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because
you
he
know,
kind of goes, "Well, who are you to stop them
yeah,
from learning if they want to learn?
yeah,
Who are you to say that they can't learn?" And you kind of think, "Well, yeah, that's true."
that's true.
But then at the same time, you can see the other guy's point as well,
Mm,
and so that's where it's such a, it does make you think about all these different sides of these sort of issues in this
definitely. And
game.
another thing that's sort of similar. So one of the sort of themes that both these guys have, they're sort of traveling around the jungle with loads of stuff.
Yeah,
Not as much as Burton and Speak, with hundreds
no,
of bearers, but they still got
and loads of brandy. There's no brandy here.
no brandy. But they've got a sort of canoe load of sort of files and sort of chests and things like this.
Yeah.
And so the shamans keeps on telling them to get rid of it. Basically, it's weighing you down, sort of spiritually as well as
Mm,
physically. And but he makes the point, this is a connection to my family and to my
mm,
culture in a way. And,
mm.
and there also you think, oh yeah, well that's a good that's a good answer.
Yep.
It's not just sort of food. So that's why I liked it. It was seeing both sides of this sort of thing.
Yeah, and that scene had another reminder of Fitzgeraldo, and the fact that one of the things that the guy has on the boat is a record player.
Oh
He's got
yeah,
a big gramophone record player with with a big record on there, and and of all the things, he eventually just kind of goes, okay, fine, and he throws all the stuff out of the boat, but he says this I'm keeping. I'm not letting you have this. And you
Yeah.
know what? I'd probably be the same way. Like, like if someone, like if I had to give everything else up, but I had to give up my sort of phone or my iPod with my music on it, I'd probably go, no, that's where I'm drawing the line. Because, there's something about music that's kind of our, that's your sort of connection to something else, isn't it? Something
Yeah.
bigger than
Yeah.
yourself. And it's sort of quite meaningful to each person in their own way. And I
Yeah.
think that was quite interesting because it reminded me in Fitzcarraldo of the bit where, when he goes charging down the river and and he's playing the opera records and
Yeah.
standing there like this, kind of going,
Yeah.
like and uses the music to subdue the sort of the hostile natives who are attacking them and stuff. And I
Yeah.
thought so that was quite interesting because even the shaman recognizes when he plays the record, he kind of goes, yeah, actually you should sit here and actually listen to this, because are you actually listening to this?
Yeah.
Because it's almost like even he picks something more
Yeah. Get deeper.
more deeper and more cosmic out of it than
Yeah.
even the chap who brought it with him, and it's so
Yeah.
important to him. He's still not listening, and I think that was quite an interesting kind
Mm.
of moment in the film as well.
Yeah. Well, how often do we really listen to music? Sort of,
Yeah.
it's so much of it around, but not.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're so saturated with stuff all the time that when do you actually really listen?
Yeah.
And if you ever like a lot of pop music and stuff, if you actually stop and listen to and concentrate on it in any meaningful way, you find out how actually really annoying and meaningless it really is.
Yeah.
So, you have to kind of then sort of search out something else. But you're right that now we're just so inundated with stuff all the time that
Yeah.
how do you find the stuff that has the meaning? You know,
Yeah. It's really. It's
I mean, you could say that about films as well, because here we kind of explore films and look at different kind of films and kind of go out and sort of dig a bit deeper into stuff. But there's so many thousands and thousands of films, isn't there? And
yeah.
there's new ones all the time, constantly. You're bombarded with constantly with stuff. There's just so much noise that
Yeah.
how do you pick out the nuggets out of that, the meaning out of that, you know?
Mm. Mm. It's true. Well, it's the
So
question. That's why we go on a trip down the Amazon to find out.
yeah, maybe, maybe.
Yeah, but
But
it's a really enjoyable film, and
yeah, it's incredible. And you talk about the river, but I wanted to mention about the river as a character in this film,
yeah,
because I love some of the moments when they show the rapids and the stuff. Because the film, I don't think that the title "Embrace of the Serpent" is meant to refer to the river, but the
no,
river in at times
totally,
almost seems came across to me
yeah,
serpent like, and it was
oh, yeah,
even shot like it looked like a, because there are some moments in the film where they show footage of snakes and
yeah,
serpents and sort
yeah,
of writhing around and sort of all
mm,
intertwined with each other and stuff. And there are moments when the river looks like that as well, doesn't it?
yeah,
Like they sort of have moments when there's these big rapids and they look almost like a snake going like this.
yeah,
And then they have moments where they go up and they do these aerial shots and
mm,
it kind of looks like a snake going through the forest.
yeah,
And I did wonder about, well, what is the significance of the title? What do they mean by embracing the serpent? What is that?
yeah. I think it's sort of, well, definitely the river, the sort of the, the power of the sort of that indigenous Amazonian way of thinking, way of living, way of being,
Mm,
and the the end, which is sort of the sort of trippy end,
mm.
without giving away too much, and that's the sort of the
Yeah,
serpent.
it's got a bit of a 2001 kind of trippy end vibe going. Yeah,
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah,
yeah, but it's quite cool. It's very cool. I don't mean to mock it because I'm not mocking it. It is actually cool and very effective.
yeah,
And I love the bit at the end when he says, like, he's talking to the guy, but he's also kind of talking to the audience and kind of saying, You've seen this now. Now go and tell other people
Yeah.
what you've seen and what you've learned. Go and spread this, you
Spread the
know.
word.
Yeah. So I think I mean it worked for me on I mean I love the film. I really enjoyed it and thought
Yeah,
it was quite powerful.
it's terrific. And I guess both films, I mean, there's quite a lot they share in common. They're both, because the thing about, I guess Richard Burton was, I mean, he was sort of a Victorian and he had his Victorian attitudes, but he also was somebody who was sort of open to the wisdom of the people he was, at least occasionally, the people he
Yeah.
was sort of,
And bringing it back and sharing it
yeah,
in some way, and even stuff that people didn't want to hear.
yeah,
So yeah, you can't fault that. And it is that dynamic is an embrace of the serpent as well, because the American in the newer story, the 1940
yeah,
segment, is clearly it emerges that he is there uh, on the basis of some commercial concern or some sort of there is an element of what he's trying to learn is because he wants to be able to take it back and exploit it.
yeah,
So hopefully I'm not spoiling too much of a spoiler, but you really should, folks, watch the films first before you come and listen to us talk about them anyway.
yeah.
But so you kind of find that sort of, and because it's the same with Richard Burton and John Hanning Speak and these guys, is that they're going to these places and maybe there's different layers of to what they're trying to achieve, because there's the part about the learning and the expanding our knowledge, finding out more about places and about these other people. But then there's the side of it of they want to do that maybe because they want to find a way of so they can extract something from it for their own gain and for their own sort of purposes and for their own culture. What can we find that we can exploit? Or how can we make money out of this? Or how can we find out a way? How can we work out a way of dealing with these people so that we can get in there to get at their stuff or whatever? So there's that kind of side of it.
I
But
don't
then
think
there's also the side of it of just finding a way to bridge the gap between the cultures and to learn from each other and to grow and find a way to live together.
yeah,
So there's kind of two sides of it, isn't there?
yeah. I didn't really see that other side. It was, I mean, yeah, I thought because the Evan Schultz guy, I mean, I think he's basically he was being sent by the was it Harvard University or something like that, the Harvard Botanical Garden, and I mean, my impression was that he was just sort of looking for uh, sort of knowledge and well, I
Well,
mean,
they wanted to find a way to purify rubber, didn't they? He
I
said he
really
wanted a
okay,
plant because because in 1940 was the Second World War was on,
right,
and
right,
they were trying to find ways that they could, improve,
yeah,
their
yeah,
stuff so that they could make, better sort of killing
yeah,
machines, basically.
yeah.
So,
Well, it wasn't back then.
yeah.
Um, but um, yeah, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's funny
Mm.
that somehow, yeah, but yeah, I guess he did have that thing, but he's best known, I think, for most of his life. He was sort of researching, psychedelic drugs. I
Mm.
think that's
Well,
what it.
yeah, but you can make the distinction between, because this is a fictional film, it's a
Yes,
fictional story,
yeah,
it's based on these real life people, but they aren't necessarily those people, if you know what I mean. So the point of the film, the points that the film is trying to make
yeah.
aren't necessarily representative of that real person and
No,
what
no,
he was
no.
about and
Well,
what
that's
he
the
was
thing.
trying
Yeah,
to do.
exactly.
Yeah. So, and I think the film, because to me that's what made it interesting, is that it was looking at all these different sides of it. Because,
Yeah,
like you say, the thing about the compass, like we talked about, like there's different perspectives on that incident
yeah,
and about how you can interpret it.
Yeah.
right? And some of them are negative, and some of them are positive,
Yeah.
and someone might be well-meaning,
Yeah.
but someone else might interpret that as not being so well-meaning
Yeah.
and misguided. And I think that's what the film really does well, is it picks apart that balancing act of it between these clashing ideas and these clashing sort of cultural sort of differences and things, and about how they can try and negotiate that.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is what I've found really fascinating about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
that's it. It's this extraordinary sort of yeah. Well, embrace of the serpent. It's it's a lot of complexity and sort of yeah, a lot going on essentially.
yeah.
I think.
So yeah, go and see it, folks. Watch it.
Well, it's really
how
good.
how did you watch it, John? Did
I
you?
streamed it on Amazon Prime, I think it was.
Mm.
You can buy it on Blu-ray as well. It's available in the
Yeah,
UK.
I did look. I did look. It is available on Blu-ray from Picadillo Panorama, which I'm not that familiar with them. I don't know if I've ever gotten any of their things before,
No,
but they look like an interesting label. They've got a lot of sort of current world cinema from all
right.
sorts of different places, and they look like they do a lot of interesting stuff. Again, folks, we're not sponsored in any way by any of these people. We're just putting this out there for you, if
Yeah.
you're interested in pursuing it. So there is a Blu-ray that is available from them. But I, like you, though, I don't have the Blu-ray. I actually just rented it on Apple TV, and it cost a couple pounds, and it was well worth it. It was a very good evening's entertainment,
Yes.
and I enjoyed it very, very much. And I highly recommend that people go and check it out if they
Yes.
get a chance. Go and
Great
seek
film.
it out. Was there anything else you wanted to say about it before we signed off, Jono?
No, but I would say terrific movie, and especially if you're interested in the Amazon, and it's up there with sort of The Mission and Fitzcarraldo and the Emerald Forest and all those great Amazonian films. I'm sure there's lots more that I don't know about, but I would say it's
Well,
definitely
those are some interesting films there.
a
Um,
match for those.
yeah, I haven't watched The Mission in a long time. I'd like to watch that again.
It's really good.
Roland Joffe one. Very, very, very cool film.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, folks, on that note, I think in the interest of time, we're going to wrap it up.
Yes.
But we want to thank you for tuning in and joining us on this exploration of these two cool explorer films. And we hope you enjoyed the conversation. We hope, if you haven't already, that you'll go and check out these films. Like I mentioned, in the United States and Canada, Mountains of the Moon will be available on Blu-ray from Kino Lorber from the 26th of November, 2024. And if you're listening after that, then it's out, and you should go and get it immediately, like now, immediately. And same with the Embrace of the Serpent. Go and check it out either on streaming, or there is a Blu-ray available for purchase as well.
Mm.
So however you consume your films, go and check them out. They're
Yeah.
fantastic. We will be back very soon. We've got a couple of really interesting guests, including some previous guests who might be making a return engagement with us, which we look forward to. Some friends of the show. And until then, we would like you to take care of yourselves, watch lots of cool films, and reach out to us. We always are happy to hear from you. There was a bit of a gap between this and our last episode, and a couple people did drop me little lines on private messages and just said, "Hey, what's going on with you guys? We haven't heard from you for a while, but we're still here. We just we've had a busy summer and lots of sort of personal stuff going on. So we've been a bit quieter, but I think you'll find we might be getting back in the film swap saddle here a bit more often over the next couple of months. So watch out for us. The best thing you can do is subscribe or follow the podcast, depending on where you find it, so that when the new episodes drop, you will be the first to know and you can come and join us for a chat. So, Jonah, good to see you. And
good to see you, David.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, and on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the Podcast.
Oh, the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.